The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to Reproactions, the first session of our direct action training. Want to be sure that everyone can hear me. So if you want to just post in the chat like we can hear you, that would be great. Going to share my screen here. So you should be able to see also the presentation. Thank you, Nancy, for letting me know that you can hear me. All right. Can y'all also see the screen though? Yeah. Yes. Okay, great. I'm going to make it larger here. Um, and so we can just dive right in and get started. Want to thank everybody for attending today, regardless of your time zone. If you're on the East Coast, it's noon. If you are in any other time zone, it's morning. So good morning and good afternoon. This is Reproaction presents Direct Action Training Series. Our first session is From Theory to Practice. And so we're going to be talking today, about a few things. But before we get to that, I want to introduce myself. And I have a co-presenter with me today. They're going to introduce themselves. And so the voice you're hearing, there's my photo there. I'm Ivania Woods, the Movement Building and Research Manager at Reproaction. You can read that block if you want, just in brief. I've been with Reproaction over 5 years. And I started out as an organizer. I'm used to doing these in person, and I can't even say like since COVID, we've done so many virtually. I have done a couple virtually, but not a lot, and it still feels a little weird to me. But here we are. You want to? I'm trying to give y'all time to read through that. But yeah, so that's my stitch. Just also in long term. I've been organizing for 10 years, total, 5 years with Reproaction. And so moving on.
Hello, the second voice you're hearing is me, Tamiya Henson. I am campaign coordinator with Reproaction, specifically focusing on the South and North Carolina. And my little bio here, it talks about being a Sagittarius and reading Afrofuturism and being a clinic escort. Those are all things I do. But about what I do with Reproaction, I focus on our bad faith medicine campaign, exposing anti-abortion fake clinics and the bad faith medicine that they try to shove down everyone's throats.
And does a phenomenal job at that.
Thank you. Eva, I think you might be muted.
I am definitely muted. Sorry, guys. So today, I was commending you and like you do a phenomenal job at Reproaction. And also getting into the objectives of today, we're going to be talking about what intersectionality is, why practice intersectionality, and how to practice intersectionality. Hence the title, From Theory to Practice. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box and I will see those. You can also, I don't have the view that you have, but you should have a question box. You should also have a chat box. Either way works. If you only have a question box or you only have a chat box, then do whatever, insert your questions wherever you have them, whenever you have them. And we'll get to those like ASAP, and also there will be time at the end to get to questions. But don't feel forced to ask questions. Like if you have it, great. If you don't, I won't take it as you being disengaged. I promise. Right? Let's go. So what is intersectionality? So intersectionality is grounded in Black feminism, and Black feminism is third world feminism, is Chicana feminism, is women of color have been developing and implementing this strategy or practice and theory and methodology, like all these things, since the 1820s. A part of the work and research that I've done in the intersectionality is about how it has evolved through time. And so where we are right now with the concept of intersectionality and it's, I guess evolving, the way it's evolved through Black feminism is what we're going to focus on today. But I want to specifically get into how it derived out of Black feminism and like why it as a term, as a concept, as a practice is so notable in the work that we do as activists. So Black feminism did a lot of the groundwork for building up intersectionality as a practice. And I want to really get into these. And so what Black feminism did was give us a way to talk about power dynamics and give us a way to change or re-articulate how we think about how we think, like period, just how we think, right? And so we're trained to think in binaries and hierarchies, and it's the way that we're trained to think is referred to as Western European thought or thinking. And I'm going to give that to Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, which is where it stemmed from for me. Like that was like where I first saw it in their publications. And so through Western European thought, all of us are trained to think in binaries and hierarchies. And that just means that we are grounded in either or thinking, where in every category, we only have two options. And within those two options, one is ranked above the other. And even if we do expand the options, we still consider the basis within those categories as the quote unquote original two, right? And so you think about race, you're either Black or you're white. You think about any census or any file you filled out a form now, they may say like African American / Black, but for so long and the way that we conceptualize it, we think white and Black, but every other race or ethnicity is rooted in like a regional area or country. Yeah. So considering that, or we just group everybody into one group. That doesn't, anyway, very difficult labels. But the point is that those are the two. And then even when you expand that and you add Hispanic, Latino, like this, all these terms, and we're like, we really don't know what that means. But that's why, right? Because our world is so much more complex than what Western European thought allows for. So moving out of race, if we go into gender and we think about masculinity and femininity in our everyday practices, we function on a range. But when it comes to people not falling within those what we consider mutually exclusive categories, it can lead to violence. You think about sexuality, there's like, you're either straight or you're gay. And it's like, actually, you could be more things. But even when you add those things, you think of it as straight or gay and then these other categories, right? Which again, there is this need to alter our lived realities to match up with this way of thinking, right? It causes us to ignore a lot of what exists in the world. And you can consider that when we think about a lot of the anti-trans bills and anti-gay bills that are coming down in our legislature, and even within the anti-abortion and white supremacist, other white supremacist movement, white nationalist movements, the way that they don't acknowledge and would just say they're just confused. And it's like, you have to suspend reality to fit into Western European thought. The way that we exist as human beings and all of our complexities, you have to deny a lot to make white supremacy real, to like the way that the world has been narrowed down to either or thinking. And even in sex categories, you're male or you're female. Well, actually, there's more than male or female. So yeah, or in within class, you're rich or you're poor. It's like, you can be neither rich or poor. And what is poor? And is destitute? Should we be thinking about destitute poverty versus working poor a little differently? Like the solutions that we come up with and the way that we think about those things are going to be determined by how much complexity we allow within our thought processes, right? Black feminism also gave us a way to think about oppression as being rooted in white supremacy. And that's basically what I was just talking about, right? And so the last thing that I want to make a point of is this notion of progress. And so within this notion of progress, in Western European thinking, we think of progress as linear, as a straight line. We move forward. We use a lot of this linear language when talking about progress. Whenever you hear somebody saying something, and we're all guilty of this, like in 2022, right? We've been saying that every year that I've been alive. In 1995, this is happening. It's the 90s, you know. We in another, this is the 21st century, and it's like we're going to be saying that until we die. If we continue to act like progress is something that happens in a linear format, which it does not. So challenging that notion of progress and seeing things as not being finite, as not being linear. And by finite, I mean like a point that we reach where we're done. So that affects how we think about solutions in the sense that we're not thinking about solutions within intersectionality as ever ending. We think of them as never ending, as continuous, which can be frustrating for some because people's lives are at stake. And yeah, that's really real, but all we can do is work towards that ideal within this concept of intersectionality. All right.
Thank you for that, Eva. I had to write down in the middle, you said something along the lines of you have to suspend reality in order for white supremacy to make sense. And I think that is a really great way to be like, this is why we should practice intersectionality, because we're not suspending reality. So thank you for that. And in a concept of what is intersectionality, it's really allowing us to recognize that one person can be experiencing multiple forms of oppression based on their gender, their race, their sexuality, their ability, a whole number of things. And when we are shifting from thinking about intersectionality just as a theory and looking at it as something we can practice, we're really going to start shifting how we think about things, what we are choosing to study, what ideas and solutions we're going to implement and develop, because we are beginning to ask ourselves what is missing, who might not benefit from this. And even simple things like, are the meeting locations we have, are they accessible for all kinds of disabilities? Are we asking people what they need, or are we using outdated prescribed band-aids in order to meet the needs of people. That like these needs are incredibly complex because systems of oppression are complex, and so our responses need to be just as wide-ranging and complex as the oppressions are, to use the same words over and over. And so when we are practicing, everybody is able to show up as their full selves, because we are simultaneously addressing multiple systems of oppression, and people are not having to break up their identities into 4 different movements, because our movements are recognizing that we all can be walking in the door, navigating systems that are interlocking and making it so that our lives cannot be lived to the fullest. And I think it's really valuable to remember that not only is intersectionality benefiting the people around us when we practice it, but it's also benefiting ourselves, and we're also to better understand ourselves as individuals.
Thank you so much for that. I am only going to just add one thing. Like, people have very strong feelings about the word intersectionality and how it's defined. And, it's something that we failed to say thus far, but I'll get into now, is that the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 2 articles in 1989, 1990. And Kimberly Crenshaw is a legal scholar, but it comes from that history of Black feminism, right? And Black feminism in academia or even in movements comes out of our lived experiences. But I want to, so with that said, when Tanasia is talking about the concept of intersectionality and it being a theory, a methodology, and a practice for liberation, a tool for liberation, the concept of intersectionality and thinking that we are all, people are like, it doesn't mean that we're intersectional beings. Actually, like, the concept of intersectionality is that we are, as individuals, as groups, and even within movements, we're all more complex than what Western European thinking allows us to be, than what white supremacy allows us to be, right? And so when you are developing theory, when you're developing intersectionality as a theory, when you're using it as a methodology, when you are engaging with intersectionality as a practice, that's what it gives you and that's what it does. So thank you for that, Tanasia. I hope that I'm not confusing people even more. Been a while since Professor Eva has been in the place to be, right? And so since the concept of intersectionality did come out of movements, it came out of movement work. So it stemmed, even Black feminism, like it all came out of movement work. People in their lived experiences looking around and being like, what is happening? We are being left out of movements that are supposed to be including us. The most notorious example being the feminist movement, particularly of what has become known as the second wave, and how Black women and other women of color were left out. And so intersectional feminism, as we call it now, had really took off in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, because when that movement was thriving, people were like deep in it and were like, this is unacceptable. This isn't going to work here, right? Are we now women? And this was coming off the civil rights movement that, kind of expanded into the feminist movement, and women of color, particularly Black women, looking around like, wait, now we pushed our concerns back during the civil rights movement. And that was intentional, by the way, based on everything I've read about it. It was an intentional decision. But then they're like, okay, we come over here to this feminist movement And we're pushing back again. Absolutely not. Like, when do we prioritize our issues? Like, and so when we get into this concept of Black feminism, which has developed more so into intersectionality, and I say that because the term intersectionality now encompasses so much more than what it was originally designed to do. But that's because the what people are calling intersectionality would be more appropriately referred to as like Black feminism. A lot of what they put under the umbrella of intersectionality is really a much larger thing. That's why I wanted to emphasize that earlier, that there's Black feminism, and then intersectionality is like a sub category, I would say. And it is also what I would agree to call maybe the most important, or like the best thing to come out of Black feminism. But addressing Western European thought is huge, right? Giving us ways to expand how we think about power dynamics. Huge. Like, without that foundation, thinking about the complexities of our issues and how we can rethink how we work together and the solutions we come up with, and also how we implement those solutions, are all encapsulated within intersectionality as a practice. And so now we'll get into what this means specifically, practicing intersectionality. So when we pull this from theory and how it changes how we think, and we get into movement work specifically and what that looks like, then there are three things out of my work that I pulled out, and I did narrow these down. There's many things that go under these categories, but because this training is only an hour, and I want to say that I did lead a discussion series last year. You can find that on Reproaction's website, and I pulled community and like movement leaders from throughout the country onto these panels, and had discussions about each one of these. So that the series is diversifying leadership is the first one, centering the most marginalized the second one, then coalition building was the third one, and that was last fall. So you can find those, and you can hear from people across movements talking about how they do it, right? So I can just tell you about how to do it, but within that discussion series, it's people who do it explaining how they do it. And so I just want to preempt this, that this is a little bit different, because with this being a training, it's about learning like the definitions and what you would do, not necessarily what we can talk about how we can do it, but hearing from people who do it on the ground. And even though me and Tanisha do this on the ground, we don't have as much time to discuss that in the amount of detail that may benefit you in a way that's going to be more robust, is what I mean. So with diversifying leadership, with centering the most marginalized, and with coalition building, I have used these three I pulled these three out as like the main things that you want to be doing. And then up under those, we're going to talk about what that looks like, right? So for diversifying leadership, practicing intersectionality requires that leaders increase inclusion at every level of participation. That means your volunteers, your staff, your leaders, whether they're paid or unpaid, in that movement at every level, at management, director, the board of the organization. It needs to be diverse. And I don't mean just racially diverse, gender, sexuality, class, like as much ability, as much diversity as you can get in. And so that it reflects the community that it's working with. And it doesn't matter what that community is. So a lot of people think, oh, we're working on race, we need to get Black people. Black people are not the only people of color that are affected by race, and racism manifests differently for different groups, and also for different genders, and also for different sexualities, and also for people with disabilities, right? So thinking about intersectionality and how these multiple systems of oppression come together You want to be also thinking about that when you are forming your leadership within your organization. So when you're recruiting people, when you are, regardless of what you're recruiting them for, you want to keep these things in mind, right? And if your organization reflects the community that it's working with, it's more likely to reach that community. So, for instance, if your organization if you're deciding, you can use this on both ends. If you are within the organization and you're in charge of hiring, that's easy. Like, you automatically think about that. But also think about that if you are an activist and you're considering what organizations to get involved with. If you are like, where should I volunteer or where should I apply to work? I would advise you to look and see who's taking this seriously. Because if you can easily get burned out and become disenchanted with the movement if you end up working with an organization that is not practicing intersectionality. Okay, so definitely want to be doing that. And you may think, well, how do I do that? It's so difficult. There's so many. I think about it in the academic realm as well, in every realm, honestly. There's always white people willing to say that we've done everything. We've tried this job search. We set up this committee. We're just not getting people. We don't know where to look. We don't know these people. They're just not applying. That's all stuff for you to go back and evaluate. Is it the application process? Is it your recruitment process? Is it the people who are evaluating the people applying? The people who are doing the interviewing? Like, all of these things need to be considered. And if you are an activist and you're going in, you want to be looking for that. How seriously are they taking it? It does take more work to make sure that your leadership is diverse at every level, but you want to invest your time and energy with an organization that is willing to do that work. Because if you're not willing to do that work within your organization, how are you doing that work in your work, right? If you can't get people in diverse to work for you or with you, how are you going to be doing outreach in the community that you're in or the communities that you serve, right? So think about that from all the ends, whether you are doing the hiring or bringing people in, or also if you're looking for organizations to get involved with. If you are already involved in an organization and you know that they need to increase diversity of that organization, there's so much material that you can come across that will help you. There are consultants that you can hire. There are so much free information on the internet that you don't have to pay a consultant for, but you get what you pay for also. Keep that in mind. The second thing I want to talk about is centering the most marginalized. And here is where I think probably more confusion than in any other one that I've witnessed with my participation in organizations is right here with centering the most marginalized. There's a lot of misconceptions on what this means, but here's what I want. I'm going to touch on all that. So social groups have spaces to work independently and collectively, right? That means that regardless of what group you consider yourself to be a part of, if you are within that organization, there is space for that. So if you're working on race, and you should have a diverse leadership, right? That means you're going to have people of different races. You may want to do it where white people meet, all the people of color meet, or if it's like gender, maybe it's the men meeting and the women meeting, the non-binary gender conforming people and trans people, like however the people within that organization create the spaces, right? And within those spaces, you're able to speak more freely. You're able to talk about the things that you want to make a priority, right? That's the whole point of diversifying the leadership, so that you have those voices there and you have those experiences in the room and at the table, and that they have real power when it comes to decision making and implementing those decisions and holding each other accountable. So forward-facing leadership reflects the issues being addressed, and that is super important. So sometimes I've seen where people think centering the most marginalized means that only the people from the marginalized group get to speak about the issue. That's not what that means. Not what that means at all. And here's why. So if you are the most directly affected by an issue, you should definitely be at the table, hands down. Absolutely. You should be the leader. People should be following your leadership and guidance on that issue. Absolutely. Hands down. But it does not mean that you're the ultimate voice or you're the ultimate decision maker, right? It's just not what it is, because think about it this way. Any social issue or oppression or when domination is present, it doesn't just affect those most directly affected. It affects everyone, and it affects everyone differently. Like I was bringing up about race and like, how intersectionality is, multiple systems of oppression are working, are intersecting, right, at any given point. And so it isn't going to be enough to, only have the most directly affected, because even people that you would associate with doing the oppression are affected. So you think about racism and you think, oh, people of color are affected by racism and white people are not. And that's not true. You think about, and it's not true because you can't oppress people without also oppressing yourself. Within these confines that white supremacy allows us, it means things like, I'll take gender, where women, no one gets to have a full range of emotions. Women get to have more emotions under these binaries and under this construct, but then men aren't. They're only able to be angry and I'm going to say like powerful or dominant or what have you. Like they have to have all the answers. You have to know everything. You can't cry. And you get to be like super abusive to women and children. And it's really interesting that people, like, you need that perspective as well at the table. If they are open, if they're socially conscious and aware of how that affects them. And that goes on to my last point. Just because someone belongs to a group does not mean that they are going to fully comprehend how they are being oppressed as members of that group. So it's not enough to just have a person from that group at the table, one person representing the whole group, right? None of us, regardless of what group or groups that we belong to, are a monolith. And we all have different perspectives and views, and we exist at different intersections. So just because, like, I'm Black, Tanasia is Black, does not mean that we experience that the same. We live in different regions of the country. We express or have different genders or potentially sexualities or class or ability, like on all those other intersections, right? And so we can bring all of that with us, which is why it's so important to practice intersectionality, so we can show up as our full selves and you get all the dynamics that you miss when we are trapped and stuck within Western European thinking and doing. So coalition building here is working with, between, and among individuals, groups, and organizations. Coalition building is such a huge part of this work. What we are trying to do with practicing intersectionality in movements is get people to understand like what has been, I guess, like termed within justice, right? So we talk about economic justice, reproductive justice, social justice, right? But we're trying to build a large social justice movement where we can use all of these lenses. Reproductive justice is studying multiple issues, but through a reproductive lens, right? And how it affects people with reproductive oppression, right? Through that lens, reproductive oppression. So we fight back on that ground. Economic justice is the same way, but through an economic lens, right? And so even though we might both look at pay equity, parental leave, what else? Things like that, we're going to look at it a little bit differently. So our talking points are going to look different than their talking points, but there's also going to be a lot of overlap, right? And that's important because systems of oppression adapt and they attack us and oppress us. I say attack because it feels like an attack, but they oppress us on multiple levels, right? Not having pay equity mostly affects people who are not men. And we have to talk about that, like through that reproductive lens, right? And if we're doing the economic lens, right, we have to talk about that gender aspect. It also affects people of different races differently. So if you're doing racial justice work, you talk about it through that lens. And you can talk about how even adding in people like, oh, well, white men make this much, black men make this much, Hispanic men make this much, black women make this much, indigenous women make this much, you know? And that's important because it's not that there's one group at the top and then there's everybody else. Even within that everybody else, that breakdown is so much more complex, and intersectionality allows us to dig into that. And so that's why we need to work across movements and be building and seeing our issues as compatible, and that we can help each other and build out a bigger movement. And it prevents us from being pitted against each other and throwing each other under the bus, especially at vital points when we need to be working together and making sure that we're all getting what we want and need.
Excuse me. Yes, I love everything you said, Eva. And I'm just going to keep it rolling. So generating and implementing more inclusivity. Our resistance stays fresh with innovative strategies and tactics. We're able to think of new ideas and new avenues for social change because we're not using outdated and narrow ways of creating that change, and we're actively going against all of the prescribed and, you know, white ways of making change, to be blunt. We also are gaining a deeper sense of community and building relationships, building our base. And we're going to gain a better understanding of one another and the complex needs that we each have and the complex systems of oppression that we all face together, whether or not we all recognize it at the same time. And because of that, we're gaining a more nuanced understanding of the worlds that we need to build. And we can really take stock of what's not working and be able to create something that will work and will sustain throughout all of the ways that systems of oppression change and shift. And when we are doing all of those things, we're still practicing what we preach. And I think that is a big thing when we discuss intersectionality as a concept and then as a practice, is, you know, not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk. And we have to do that in order to build relationships with people and show up for the organizing events that other movements are planning. And remember that, you know, we do need each other and we also do need independence, but we don't have to always be stuck underneath the white supremacist Western notion of individuality that I think can really keep movements and individual people from being able to fully understand the concept of intersectionality and then move on to practice it as well. And I mean, it's simple, but the least amount of people die or live diminished lives. When we're creating and generating and making space for people to carry all of the identities that they might have into the movement spaces we're in, into just the community that we're in, they're not going to have to splice themselves up and be one person one day and another person another. And they're also not going to fall through the gaps that exist in our systems that are creating oppression and are going to keep them from getting the resources and the needs that they have in order to live their best lives. That's what I'm thinking on that, I want to pass it to Eva to elaborate or add anything else you might have here.
I think that's cool. Like this first session is really just like an initial get you in, broadly talk about these things, and then the next three we dive in to
Mm-hmm.
what people are probably would more closely associate with a direct action training. I always like to set the background or foundational work here because um, we all need to be educating ourselves and continuously educating ourselves within movement work. There's a lot of misconceptions about intersectionality, um, what it means, what it does, why it's valuable. And so I want to knock that out of the way first because the rest of the sessions, if you have this as your groundwork or your foundation, then you'll better understand like why those are going to go the way that they are going to go. Right. And so just FYI for folks. I think that you covered this pretty well. I have nothing to add because we're going to get into some questions, but these will be covered throughout. We're gonna come back to these, right? Like again, I guess the only thing I would add is just that like this generating implementing more inclusivity, that is the goal. That is the overarching goal. Like these three things here that are listed, these are like, within that goal, what we're wanting to do and what we're doing. Because within white supremacy, there's this notion that we're going to get rid of racism. We're going to get rid of we're going to get rid of it, and intersectionality is like actually we're not. Like black feminism is pretty clear. Like it's an ideal, and by definition ideals mean things that will never happen in reality. But that doesn't mean that because we can't completely get rid of it, we shouldn't strive to increase inclusion under the systems that are supposed to be taking care of us, and helping us, live fuller lives and be more included in our governments, in our societies, in our communities, right? And so if you know that, then you get to deal more realistically. I think like with white supremacy, it's just so unrealistic. Like it's so unrealistic that we all are just subject to anxiety and depression because you have to suspend reality. Like to believe in the things white supremacy wants us to believe, their truths, these alternative facts, like it's complete nonsense. And it's trying to level between that complete nonsense and your lived reality of seeing that none of that stuff is true, but it's what you've been told, right? And it's what you believe for so long. So it's like a process, it's a lifelong journey, because not only is it something that white supremacy is something that we got and then all of a sudden we broke from that. That is not true. We constantly are bombarded by those messages, right? Like throughout our lives, and those ways of thinking, like throughout our lives. And it's so powerful. It's in every social structure. It's in every system. And yeah, it definitely messes with all of us mentally. Um, and fighting against it, the struggle against it is also taxing, especially when you have so many conformists who are perfectly fine with living in an alternate state, even though they're not perfectly fine. Because clearly you wouldn't engage in so much violence to keep this thinking and ways of being alive if it was the way that we should be living and thinking, right? But I digress. Not really, but a little bit. But we'll get into all of that stuff. So before we get into the questions, I want to let everybody know that you can follow us on social media at Reproaction on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. You can also email us at reproaction@reproaction.org. And when you email reproaction@reproaction.org, if you want to direct it to a certain person, you can. We'll get it. If you just want to, like, if you have a question just for Reproaction, just in general, it'll go to the person it needs to go to. Don't worry. That website, that email address is monitored. And also, you can visit our website at reproaction.org. Now, with that said, there are going to be people wondering if this recording is going to be shared, and it will be shared from our social media, but it won't be sent to people who attend. How you can access it is going to our website. You will want to go down, and it'll be posted within the week, right? It won't take long to go up. You want to scroll down to the bottom of Reproaction's homepage, all the way to the bottom. You look on the left at the bottom. There's going to be a word down there that says resource. It's going to be underlined. Click on that. It's the link. It's a hyperlink. It'll take you to our resource page, and you will see on that resource page from direct action training, from theory to practice. Click on that. Boom. It's also, if you follow us if you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, or you just want to roll over to YouTube and go to Reproaction's page, it's there. So on our website, it's an embedded YouTube video. So you can watch it directly on YouTube, or you can go to our website and watch it from our website. Either way, the recording will be up. It'll be posted. And or you could just do a Google search from theory to practice, Reproaction, and our resource page should come up, and it'll be right there. And so we have 3 more sessions in this direct action training. The next one they're all 2 weeks apart from each other. So 2 weeks from now, on August 9th, we'll be building your base. So we're going to talk about recruitment and mobilization. And for that one, it will be me, Ivania, and our deputy director, Shireen. We'll be talking about building your base, and it's going to be fantastic. Already have that one ready to go, and it is going to be amazing. So with that said, looking at some of the questions, thank y'all for y'all's feedback, and let's see what you have. So Mandy is asking us, Tanisha, intersectionality is linked to reproductive justice. Is reproductive justice as a phrase exclusive to Black-led organizations? I've been told that non-Black-led organizations should use reproductive rights or reproductive freedom instead. And I want to get your take on that, Tanisha.
So I will say with my history brain, I know reproductive justice was started by Black and brown women, but I've not thought about if white-led orgs should be using that specifically. I think like it can be difficult to like have a pulse on that at all times. And I think that if folks are taking their marching orders and their like directives from Black folks and are in coalition with Black folk, I'm not gonna like stop someone, but I do think it can get problematic when people are saying they're doing reproductive justice work and are completely forgetting, you know, where it started and who started it and who we need to be centering in that work. So that's kind of my initial take.
I want to get your take first, because this is an interesting question for me, because Reproaction was co-founded by a Black and white woman, Erin Matson and Pamela Merritt, both phenomenal. And the co-founder that is Black left the organization to go lead another organization. And one of my people, I will say, immediately hit me up and was like, well, when it went public, when everybody else knew, oh, y'all can't say y'all are Black-led anymore. And I was like, that's interesting that you would say that as your response for where we are right now, right? Like, I felt like that was like, you're not gonna ask me how I am, how I'm doing with all this, nothing, just okay, cool. But that's because we had a personal relationship. So with that, I'm like, yeah, we're not a Black-led organization. And that did hit us in a very real way when we were not able to re-up for some funding that we had, and ended up losing a staff member because of that. But my feelings are, I'm going to go with, you have to question, like, what does it mean to be Black-led, right? What does it mean to be women of color led? Is it just the executive director? If the board or the advisory committee is all people of color? If the executive director is white, but there's diversity in every other like level of leadership, including the board, staff, the volunteers? What does that mean? And I think what Tanasia was really getting at is like, if you're following the leadership of women of color or people of color with the capacity for pregnancy, if you are doing that work, if you're checking in with them, if you're working in coalition with them, what does that mean? And so for me, I'm like, a reproductive justice organization is more than the race of the person in the executive position for me. I think Reproaction does reproductive justice work, and it's been a journey. I would say there were times where I questioned it, but this work, this life, our movements, it's all a journey, and like we're all striving to become more of that ideal, right? And so working towards that, like I don't think there are any organizations, regardless of leadership, that I've seen where I'm like, oh, this is reproductive justice and they're doing it all, hitting the notes and running on all axes. I would disagree with that. But that's the beauty of it too, is that you end up with all this diversity within the reproductive justice movement. All right. So thank you for that. How do you stay resilient and avoid burnout when you face resistance and pushback in trying to implement these practices? So, okay, I'll go first and then you can go, Shanasia.
Great.
I practice intersectionality, right? So here's the thing though, with this concept of, with Black feminism, right? Because we do put a lot on intersectionality, but really with Black feminism, it helps us think about, like I said, this notion of progress. And so when I was younger, right? I don't think I was ever young. I feel like I was born 40, okay? But when I was younger, when I first got into like movement work, I had very naive notions of what it would take, how fast we would be able to accomplish equality and get, to equity, from equity to equality. And I was like, why haven't we solved these problems? It isn't that hard. Like, it just isn't. Like, I don't understand why we haven't. And I thought that if I wasn't doing the work, who was going to do it? I was so self-centered, and I was so full of myself in a way that I am not proud of. And it's not even like it was explicit or that I demonstrated that to other people, but it was within me. It was how I thought about it and how I felt about it, right? And so in running campaigns and losing, like it was rocking. Like, oh my God, all this work we just put into this campaign and we did not win. Like, what? Why would people not want to raise the minimum wage? What? Right? Why would people not want Medicaid expansion? What is happening? And so you learn really quickly, and that's why education is so important, right? So as I was learning about humans and about our government, our political system, how all of these things work, I'm like, oh, humans are interesting creatures. Okay. Sometimes you can get trapped within your activist bubble where everybody you talk to and are with are progressive, and you forget there are people out here who are perfectly fine with the white supremacist delusion and perpetuating all the violence needed to sustain that system and keep a very narrow range of people in power. And we are up against something that's so much larger than what I could have ever imagined. And also thinking about problems as something that could be solved completely and forever, right? And then re-articulating how solutions are generated and also implemented. And like when you create a solution for a problem, you're creating more problems somewhere in there that are going to need solutions. And like no solution, a solution today isn't necessarily a solution 10 years from now, right? Like you have to constantly reevaluate your solutions. And so just knowing that this is a never ending process, it allowed me to not burn out, because I don't think I have to do this now. It's like the problems are going to be here. I can jump in, jump out, jump in, go over here, do a little bit of this, come back to that. And then, so yeah, it helped me in that way. And it also helped me to disassociate. And what I mean by that is not in like the psychological, well, kind of in the psychological sense, but really in the way that I am able to not wrap my identity so much in this work. Where it's like what we win or lose is not an indication of Ivania and my worth and value on this planet. So Tanasia?
I want to agree with everything you said. I think something that came up for me while you were talking is when we are practicing intersectionality, specifically when we're working on relationship building and coalition building, we're learning more about other people and learning that like every person can be trusted and what they know is best for them. And something that has really helped me in all of the many kinds of work I do within the reproductive justice movement is like, whatever you're doing, whatever solutions you're making or action or plan or, you know, whatever volunteer stuff you might be doing, remember that if you feel like you have to be there in order for things to get done, you're not trusting people. And you're burning yourself out and you're putting more pressure on yourself than is necessary and not allowing individuals to be able to let you know what they need and let you know how you can best support them. And I think that's kind of one that I stick with continuously is like, remember to take care of myself and that people know what they need. And we live in a world with lots of people who want to make it a better place. And if we can't do it, there are people who can.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is. That is actually right too. I would sum that up as understanding that you're not doing this work for other people in the sense that you're replacing them in the movement. A lot of people are speaking up for people who can't speak up for themselves. Like, ooh, wait a minute, everybody can speak up for themselves now.
Right.
That shouldn't be why you're here. So yeah. So any book recommendations? We gotta hurry up. We got like less than a minute. Any book recommendations to learn more about these subjects? We'll just shout them out as they come to mind. I would anything by Bell Hooks, and
yes,
me anything by Bell Hooks. The Bridge Called My Back. No, This Bridge Called My Back. I always mess it up. Patricia Hill Collins. Black Feminist Thought.
I'm thinking of Killing the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts.
Baby, come on now.
Honestly, anything by Adrienne Marie Brown also.
Yes. Love.
Shout out North Carolina.
Okay. Yeah, and there's so many books. Just like Google that, right? And lists are going to come up, especially in light of 2020. A lot of book lists popped up and recommendations popped up, so it's really easy for you to find them. Ones I would not recommend. We didn't ask for that, so I'm not going to be messy. But yeah, pick wisely. So we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank all of y'all for attending. If you haven't registered for any of the other ones, go do that now. And I'll see y'all in a couple weeks. Thank y'all for attending and being so great and having questions. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.